All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the stream, and welcome if you are new here. Thank you so much for joining me today. We have another stream and another topic to talk about regarding PlayStation. And this topic that we're going to be talking about today is, I think, interesting for a myriad of reasons, but it's also the timing of it, right? It's the timing of Sony coming out here and once again answering questions pertaining to PlayStation first party day-and-date releases, saying MBG downgraded his camera. Does it look that way? Does the camera not look as good as it normally does? You know what it is? Actually, yeah, give me some feedback here for a moment. What is looking different to you? The reason why I'm asking is because my camera actually did update, and I think it may have reset the settings. So if anybody's noticing anything different, you're saying the lighting is just a bit darker. Okay. Actually, yeah, now that you mention it, I can kind of see that too. I look not as clear. Unfortunately, I don't think it gives me the option to mess around with the settings once I'm live. So I'll have to mess around with that. That's really annoying. I don't know why it did that. I didn't think that when the camera updated, it was also just going to reset my settings. Saying it looks more green screen. Interesting. Somebody's saying it's just the lighting. Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that feedback. If you guys didn't say anything, I probably wouldn't have noticed. So I'll mess around with the settings. Hopefully I won't forget before the next stream. But yeah, before I dive into this topic today, first off, I want to acknowledge New Soul 9. Thank you so much, buddy. Multiple $5 super chats. I'm going to read your super chats momentarily. So thank you for that support, man. And I noticed that Jay Pierce has also gifted a membership. Big shout out to you, Jay Pierce. Thank you so much for that support, man. Getting us started today, getting us started off strong. So yeah, guys, if you appreciate my streams, if you appreciate my content, if you're somebody who, kind of frequently watches it and engages with it, and it's just something that you look forward to, please consider supporting me directly if that's within your means. I am fan funded here. I rely on you guys to be able to continue to produce this content at the rate that I do. So as I always say, becoming a channel member helps tremendously. And if you are already a channel member, please consider gifting channel memberships. As you have seen, people have done this time and time again, and they continue to do so. And it's just a nice thing to do for the community, and it helps me out a lot. So if you're not able to do either of those things, or if you don't want to do either of those things, also consider donating a super chat. Super chats are just as important. It's also direct fan funding and supports what I do here. So yeah, consider doing that as well. If you're not up to doing either of those things, though, as I say, just being here, watching the content, and hitting that like button. So for those who are here right now, or for those who are watching later on, please just take a second to hit that like button. I would really appreciate that. But before I dive directly into the topic at hand, I'm going to read New Soul 9's super chats. New Soul 9 says, MBG, another reason subscription services are superior is because it benefits the consumer more. Hear me out. Live service is just to make sure the publisher, aka Sony, can pay for game development and to basically have everything stay the same. Versus if you have a subscription service, the consumer would benefit more because they are getting games day and date. Especially subs are safer when you are looking for the most safe and consistent revenue, and to not run the risk of getting hit if you put out bad content versus the live service risk just increases. So wouldn't you take the most logical approach if we were looking at it from a what's the most safe revenue stream? Would you say subscription services are? For the person that said live service is a bonus for Sony, you have it twisted. Live service is to replace their old way of them covering game development, because Sony will reach the point in the future or 10 to 15 million is no longer enough to cover. So basically you're saying if Sony sells in the future 10 to 15 million, or they continue to sell 10 to 15 million copies of their AAA games, it's no longer going to be enough to cover the cost of those games or to break even, let alone make a profit. Well, I think you bring up an interesting point here, New Soul 9, and here's the problem, New Soul 9, with I think the way you're framing it, and that's not to say that there's anything wrong with the way you're framing it. I just do think that there is something problematic here that, if you think about it, it's not really going to matter as much as I think you make it sound or other people make it sound. And what I'm really saying here is that the points you're making, right? So you say here that one of the reasons why a subscription service and relying on a subscription service as your main revenue source, your main revenue stream, is superior to what Sony's going to do with live service games, is because you're saying that the consumer would benefit more from the subscription model. Well, here's where I think there's something missing in your argument, New Soul 9, and that is the fact that you have to take into consideration that Sony putting out live service games, think about what they are. They're video games, right? So if Sony succeeds in their live service endeavor, the only way that's going to happen is if they put out good video games that people want to keep playing. So from a consumer perspective, I don't see how that's any more of a win or any more of a loss than, say, a subscription service that is putting out content on a regular basis. If you actually really break it down, right? If you really break down the live service model and put it up against the subscription service model, the only real difference comes in the form of the types of games. Because live service games, the assumption is that there's going to be a diverse array of live service games underneath PlayStation's banner, right? And when you look at, let's say, Microsoft with Game Pass, you're going to see a wide array of games underneath Microsoft's banner being fed into the subscription service. The real difference to me here is that it just comes down to the type of experience that you're trying to put out there to get people, to keep people hooked. I think New Soul 9, ultimately, that's the difference here. And we could try to speak in a more broad sense about, like, what does the consumer really want? If there's one thing I think that me, you, and everybody else can agree on, is that there are a lot of consumers out there. And all consumers have their own opinions, their own wants, their own, preferences. And so I think the best way to view Microsoft's approach going forward with Game Pass and basically going all in with the subscription service model, and then to view Sony's path where they're going all in with the live service game model, you can have your preferences, of course, and there's nothing wrong with talking about the pros and cons of each. But one thing I think that we can safely say is that they're ultimately just different paths that lead to the same end result, and it's going to be up to the consumer to ultimately decide which path they prefer. And it could work out in such a way where actually maybe the consumer doesn't have to decide, right? Maybe the consumer decides, hey, there's one or two live service games that Sony puts out that I'm stuck to because I really enjoy them and I keep going back to them. But at the same time, that consumer is also subscribed to Xbox Game Pass and always looks forward to the next game that Microsoft is going to release into their service. The reason why I think Sony is not... Let me put it this way. The reason why I think people are concerned that Sony may go too far into live service and end up abandoning or getting too far away from single player is because of the potential that live service games have. And there's no doubt about that. They have a mass amount of potential, and the sky is seemingly the limit. But I just think that the one great thing about Microsoft's showcase, okay, and this is something I haven't said yet, and it just popped into my head, and I just realized right now, like, this is actually probably the best thing that came out of Microsoft Showcase, is the fact that, as far as I'm aware, every new game that they showed from their first-party studios, again, as far as I'm aware, is single player. So if there was any nervousness or trepidation that, Sony's going all in with live service games, they're getting ready to eventually abandon single player. Well, Microsoft, if you don't trust Sony, right? Like, if Sony has a successful live service game or 2 or 3, and they start just raking in the money, Sony is a business. They might be tempted to say one day, it could be 10 years from now, but one day they might say, I don't know, maybe we should, should we consider investing in single player games as much as we do? Well, if Microsoft keeps putting out single player games, at least at the rate that seemingly they're getting ready to do, that's that's going to ensure that Sony's going to have to compete with that. Not only because their competition is now putting out single player games as well. And, we could get into the conversation of will those games be as high quality? Will they be as good? That's not necessarily relevant to the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that Sony's going to do what they've always done. And a big part of the topic that we're going to discuss today is essentially Sony just coming out and reaffirming once again that what they have always done continues to work. Right? And so, New Soul 9, before I get way too off track here, to get back to your main point, you're basically just trying to figure out, you're trying to ask the question, which revenue stream is better? Live service games or the subscription service model? And again, we could talk in terms of one is just simply better than the other, but I don't think that's true at all. I just don't. I'm not going to say that the live service model is better than the subscription service model, because I just don't think that's true. I just think that the live service model works. It can work. And hopefully it will work. I feel like the subscription service model is a little bit more unproven, but it seems to me, based off of what Microsoft is doing, that they're going to make it work. Granted, not everybody might be able to follow in Microsoft's footsteps and make it work in the same way that Microsoft is, because the truth is Microsoft is brute forcing it, right? The big advantage that Microsoft has here, and you could argue this is why Sony is deciding to go the live service route. And actually, think about this for a second. It almost seems like when it comes to creating a new sustainable revenue source for Microsoft and Sony, they're both playing to their strengths. I mean, really think about this for a moment. Microsoft is brute forcing their way with the subscription-based model. And the reason why they're able to brute force their way is because they have pretty much an unlimited amount of money to spend. Money is not an issue for Microsoft. So they can afford to spend as much money as they need to make this thing work and have that long-term plan. To whereas Sony, on the other hand, they don't have that same type of money. And so what Sony deciding to do is, okay, how do we find a way to make a similar amount of money in a similar way, but we have to leverage our greatest strength? What is Sony's greatest strength, or what has it been this entire time? Sony's greatest strength this entire time has been to put out quality video games. So it makes sense that Sony will then decide, if we take our greatest strength and apply that to a genre of game that has been proven to be self-sustainable. You see how that makes a lot more sense for Sony? Because Sony simply can't do what Microsoft is doing right now, monetarily speaking. And even if they tried, it would be way more risky. So it's actually really, really interesting the more you kind of zoom out and the more you look at the bigger picture of how Microsoft is approaching their revenue stream, right? Their recurrent revenue stream, and how Sony is doing it, there's no guarantee that both will work. There's no guarantee that both will fail. But the one thing we can objectively say is that both companies are inherently playing to their strengths. And why wouldn't they? So I think your super chats, well, first off, I really appreciate it, New Soul 9. I appreciate the amount of super chats. It's quite a bit. So thank you for that, man. But I also think that it does bring up an interesting conversation for sure, and as time goes on, we're going to have to just sit back and kind of watch, how does Game Pass grow, right? How does Sony's live service games, how are they faring? Are people actually playing them? Are they succeeding? Are they failing? Are they, doing what Microsoft or Sony expects them to do? It'll be really interesting to watch and see how it all unfolds. So thank you for that, man. And I'm just noticing here we have Cuddy Can't Hang choosing to become a channel member. Thank you. At least it seems that way. Says you're a new member. Appreciate that, dude. Thank you so much for that support. I'm looking at this, and for some reason, sometimes when it comes to these milestone chats, there are like times where people put out a milestone chat and like YouTube just doesn't show what they said, and it ends up confusing me because it looks like somebody became a member, but it was actually a milestone chat. But based off what I can tell, this is a new member. So thank you so much for that, Cuddy Can't Hang. Really appreciate that. Brings us to I only boosted it to 3, but that's fine. Michael Lynch, thank you for the super chat. You're saying, did you watch Vatty Video's Armored Core 6 video? That's the video that I said made me a believer in that game. I haven't seen it yet. No. I know that you guys were telling me yesterday I have to check out Armored Core 6, and I have to admit I completely forgot. I got pretty busy yesterday and had quite a few things to do, and I actually didn't get to watch much YouTube at all, but I'll try to keep that in mind. I do like Vatty Video, and I appreciate his videos. He does a really good job with them, so I definitely want to hear what he has to say in regards to Armored Core 6. So I'll definitely check that out. I have to remember. That's the problem. So thank you for the super chat, man. RU46 N2 Ray, you're saying Universal Studios is doing a Last of Us horror maze. Really? That must have just been announced, because this is the first time hearing of that. That's pretty funny, man. I would like to check that out. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys think about Universal? Hello, are we back? My mic just literally died for a moment there. I have no idea what that was about. Sorry about that. Man, what is going on today? Everything's like resetting and... All right, I'm back now. That was weird. I don't think that's ever happened to me before. That never happened the mic never cut out like that before. I hope it doesn't happen again. It just popped up and said my USB device wasn't recognized, and I didn't realize it was my microphone. And I don't know what that was about. So, all right, hopefully that doesn't happen again. Is it boss? No, he's over here. He's not chewing wires or anything like that. So, saying time for an upgrade. I don't know. We'll have to see if it it becomes a problem, I might have to do something about it. Okay, we're going to dive into today's main topic of discussion, though. And as you can see, I have a title up on screen here. This is coming from VGC, and it says, Sony says not releasing its first-party games on PlayStation Plus on day one is working. Continuing, Sony Interactive Entertainment still has no plans to put its first-party games onto PlayStation Plus on the day of release, according to a key executive. In an interview with GamesIndustry.biz, Vice President and Global Head of Subscriptions Nick McGuire said the company has no interest in making all of its first-party games available on day one like Microsoft does with Xbox Game Pass. We are happy with our strategy, McGuire said. Putting games in a bit later in the life cycle has meant that we can reach more customers 12, 18, 24 months after they have released. We're seeing customers still get excited about those games and jumping in. For us, that's working. Occasionally, there will be an opportunity to invest in a day-and-date release like Stray, and we will jump on those when they come in. But for us, letting those first-party games go out to the platform outside of the service first, that's working, and that will continue to be our strategy moving forward. When asked if this strategy could change in the future for PlayStation's planned live service titles in order to ensure a large audience for them at launch, McGuire didn't commit either way. We are constantly working out what the right strategy is moving forward, he replied. How are player habits going to evolve, and how do we make sure the service meets those future habits? There's no more I can say on that at the moment, but obviously we are keeping close to it and thinking about the role that PlayStation Plus can play moving forward. Last year, both PlayStation boss Jim Ryan and the company's head of independent developer initiatives, Shuhei Yoshida, said it had no intention of releasing its games on PlayStation Plus day one. In March of 2022, Jim Ryan said, "We feel if we're to do that with the games that we make at PlayStation Studios, that virtuous cycle will be broken. The level of investment that we need to make in our studios would not be possible, and we think the knock-on effect on the quality of the games that we make would not be something that gamers want." Shuhei Yoshida reiterated that in September 2022, saying, "It's like in the movies, a movie comes out at the theater first, then goes to pay-per-view or a subscription service or free TV, every time generating new revenue and reaching out to a broader audience. In the same kind of way, we believe in the premium release of a title at launch, and after maybe 6 months or 3 months or 3 years, when the game sales come down, inclusion into PlayStation Plus Extra can help introduce these games to new, broader audiences." And so that is exactly what Sony had to say in June of 2023 regarding PlayStation exclusive titles, first-party titles, going into their PS Plus subscription service day and date. And so for me, this is something that I think is going to create quite a bit of discussion, understandably so. It always does. We have a situation here where you have two big gaming companies that are in competition with one another. On one side, you have Sony. On the other, you have Microsoft. Sony is, as we know, selling their games at full price. And it's interesting because over the past couple of years, we have seen Sony completely change things up, right? And really start to do these things that Microsoft started, but doing them in a different way. And it's interesting to see Sony kind of take this approach. And I think this is the approach that Sony has always taken, but it really is something worth paying attention to if you care at the end of the day about trying to understand like how this is going to potentially affect you as the consumer. Sony seems to always take this approach where they obviously don't rush into things, but even when they're looking at what their competitors are doing or what other companies are doing, game companies, and how it might be working, they seem to also take this stance of like, well, what aspects of this can we utilize? What aspects of this make sense for us and our business and how we run PlayStation? And that's what's fascinating, because I think when we entered this new generation and Sony announced something like PlayStation Plus Extra and PlayStation Plus Premium, I think a lot of people really thought that this is the beginning, right? This is the beginning of the end, so to speak, in terms of full price premium releases. It's just a matter of time until Sony does Day&Date, and it's worth noting that just because this is what Sony's saying now in 2023, that doesn't guarantee that things won't change. If there's anything we can take from PlayStation under Jim Ryan's leadership, is that things can change at a moment's notice. That's just how it goes. Sony is willing to make adjustments and make changes at any time. And when it comes to releasing first-party games Day&Date onto a service, that's not immune. However, just because we keep that in mind, we also have to ask ourselves, okay, what is the likelihood of this happening? Well, right now, the likelihood is low. It's very, very low. Basically, what Sony is saying, to simplify it as much as I can, is that it's not broken, so we're not going to fix it. That's pretty much what Sony's saying here. And it's understandable, because if you're Sony, right, and you are charging $70 for your AAA titles, and then you go to check, how are they selling? How are our AAA video games selling? And you're seeing, oh, well, this one just sold 10 million. This one that we released a year and a half ago is about to hit 10 million. One that we released even before that is now like going on to hit like 12 million or something like that. Some of their games occasionally hit 15 million plus. And you're selling, and the bulk of these sales, the important thing is the bulk of these sales are happening at full price. You really can't blame Sony, right, for basically coming out and saying, yeah, we know our competition is doing Day&Date with their games, but we're not going to do that. And Sony has just drawn a clear line in the sand. And I think that there were people who were always under the mindset that, well, once Microsoft starts showing games and releasing them consistently, like higher quality games, that is, and they start putting them into Game Pass day one, that's going to put a lot of pressure on Sony. I think it will put pressure on Sony, no doubt about that. But I think a lot of people do believe that that's when Sony's going to change their model. But people leave a major key factor out of these discussions. And a lot of times they do kind of reduce down to like fanboy level, just rhetoric back and forth. You know, people just want to be right about what they're saying, but they're ignoring certain realities and certain facts. And actually 3000 coming in with 5 membership gifts today. Guys, let's get some W's in the chat for actually 3000 doing it once again, keeping the membership train going nice and strong here. Thank you so much for that, actually. You've been a huge supporter of the channel in the form of membership gifts, not just viewership, of course, but you're very supportive of this community, and we thank you so much for that, actually. So, got to give you a little Keanu for that one. Really appreciate it, bud. That's the thing, though, isn't it? People leave out a key factor. Exley 3000 says, of course, my friend. Would you like an Arnold, Exley? I need to try to get better at asking you guys, what soundbite would you like? You let me know, Exley. And anybody else who gifts memberships, you let me know which soundbite you would like. That's the thing. People leave out a big thing. Yeah, I'll give you a little Arnold there. Crazy Arnold. I love when new people come to the channel and they're not familiar with like the crazy Arnold sounds, and they just hear it for the first time and they're like, what was that? So funny. The thing that people leave out is this. And I know many of you are understanding of this. And I'm not saying I'm not trying to tell people that you need to care about Sony's numbers and Sony's money. I'm not telling you that. All I'm telling you is if you want to understand why, if you want to understand the reasoning, then you might want to pay attention to this. Right now, the way things are working and how they will likely continue to work is it really doesn't matter what Microsoft is doing. And it won't matter until it has a tangible effect on Sony's numbers. And until that day comes, Sony is not going to worry about what Microsoft is doing for their consumers and their customers. And that may sound bad, but it's just the economic reality, right? It's business. That's just the way it works. When Sony checks their quarterly reports and they check their numbers, until they see things start to either slow down or drop, they're not going to do anything. And when I say that Microsoft's strategy of Game Pass, if Microsoft can consistently start delivering game after game after game, quarter after quarter after quarter, that gets good review scores and really boosts Game Pass numbers, that will likely, it's not a guarantee, but it will likely have a tangible effect on Sony's numbers. It might not, though, and that's the fascinating thing about this conversation is Microsoft has been supporting Game Pass, I believe, since 2017, and we are about to see them have a push with Game Pass and their games that Sony has never had to contend with. But also, on a consumer level, we've never really seen anything like this. We've never really seen a game like Starfield drop Day&Date into a subscription service, a game of that scale, a game of that size. People are very much used to and conditioned to spending money on those games. Like a good amount of money, paying full price. And Microsoft is out here saying, you don't have to do that. You don't have to spend $70 on Starfield. You can if you want. All you have to do is subscribe to our service for $10. And as long as you're subscribed to it, you have access to it. That is the antithesis of what Sony is doing right now. And the one question that we simply don't have an answer to, Sony doesn't have an answer to this. Microsoft doesn't have an answer to this. No one does. That is, how does a game like Starfield releasing into Game Pass for $10, how does that affect Sony and their games releasing at $70? We can speculate, and that's all we can do, and we will do that. Some people will speculate that, it's going to hurt Sony's sales. It's going to have an impact because more people are going to decide that, you know what, Microsoft is giving me these big games for $10, but Sony, you're asking me for $70. I'm not paying that $70. So until you match that, until you lower the price, I'm not going to give you my money. Other people will speculate that it's going to be totally fine. People are going to subscribe to Game Pass for $10 for a game like Starfield and other games like Hellblade and Fable, but they're also going to pay full price for games like Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine and other titles that Sony has coming down the line. These are just two possible outcomes. And then there's a lot of different scenarios that could occur in between. But if I had to guess, based off of what Sony is saying here, I think Sony has a bit of confidence. I do. I think Sony has a bit of confidence that, listen, our model isn't broken. Our model isn't slowing down. Our model is working better than it ever has. And that, to me, is the really fascinating part of all of this, is that even though Sony does have a desire, as we know, because Jim Ryan said this himself, where they want to reach hundreds of millions of people. They want hundreds of millions of people to play The Last of Us, to play God of War, to play Horizon. But right now, it seems to be tens of millions of people. Even though that is their desire and their long-term goal, reaching tens of millions of people with their games in the way that they have has still proven to be very effective. However, as we talked about earlier with New Soul 9's Super Chats, even though it has worked and it continues to work and it is effective, there is still quite a bit of risk involved with it as well. And that is obviously the part that Sony worries about the most. And when we look at the consumer side of things here, there's no doubt I haven't been looking around to see what people are saying about Sony's response as to whether or not they're going to do Day&Date with their first-party games onto PlayStation Plus. I don't know what people are saying. I don't even know how many people have come across this and are reading about it. But I have no doubt that there are going to be those individuals on the internet that try very hard to make Sony sound like they're the bad guys, right? They are the bad guys for continuing to charge full price, and it does force everybody. I think it does force every consumer to ask themselves the question: how do you feel about Sony basically sticking to their guns? How do you feel about Sony essentially telling you we're not going to be putting games like Spider-Man 2 into PlayStation Plus Day&Date? If you want to play Spider-Man 2 at launch, probably for the first year, probably the first 2 years of its life, maybe even longer, maybe up to 3 years. It's hard to determine for as long as it's going to sell. You have to pay full price for it. And it's up to every consumer to ask themselves how they feel about it, right? And this is why people, they try very hard, and I'm absolutely guilty of this. And I want to make that clear. I'm very guilty of this, and I'm working very hard to try to be much better with it. With these types of conversations, it becomes very, very easy to just look at one side of the coin. Even if you choose to look at both sides of the coin, it becomes too easy to just only see the other side and only see the negatives. And so, for me personally, right, when it comes to what Sony's saying here, I don't have a problem with this. Somebody might say, why not? Wouldn't you like Sony to basically tell you you only have to pay $10 to access their games? Well, sure, yeah. What would be wrong? I don't see anything wrong with saving money. I would like to save money. But at the same time, I also don't see a problem with Sony's model as long as they continue to do what they've been doing. As long as the quality doesn't drop, as long as they really do try to deliver not just good games, but great games. Not just, mid-size games, but large games, right? As long as it always seems clear to me that they really are trying to push the bar, right? Trying to raise the bar, trying to push further without going too far, of course, because we've talked all about how that can have its, negative ramifications as well. But as long as they keep putting out these games and I enjoy them in the way that I am, then I genuinely do not mind paying full price for these video games. I can agree that if somebody says to me, hey man, Starfield looks like it's going to be really, really high quality and a really big game, and Microsoft is saving me money, right? They're just going to let me have access to that game for $10 a month. Yeah, that you're 100% right. That is, they're saving you money, assuming that you only stay subscribed for that amount of time, right? And just as I talked about Sony's live service endeavor versus Microsoft's subscription service endeavor, the thing that's interesting to me about this is, once again, I almost feel like Sony and Microsoft are ultimately chasing the same thing. And I think that's the part about it that gets so easily lost in the conversations that happen across the internet, is that they really truly are at the end of the day chasing the same thing. And think about it. They both need to produce video games. And then they need to release those video games at a rate that keeps their customer base happy and satisfied. And we had this conversation yesterday about, like, is every game that Microsoft is planning to release from their first-party studios into Game Pass going to be this on the same quality level and production level as the games that Sony releases, seemingly at a lesser rate for a more premium price? And I think generally speaking, the answer is some of those games from Microsoft will be potentially on that same level, potentially have those same production values, potentially be worth that full $70. Others will likely be smaller. Others will likely have a lower production value. And if people were to, pay full price for them, they're likely to be $30, $40, somewhere in that range, maybe $50. And I think that's kind of it right there, right? That to me is the main separating factor right now between Sony and Microsoft. And it's that Sony is essentially trying to promise their customer base exactly what I said, that as long as they keep doing that, I'm here and I'm paying and I don't mind. And that is, we are trying to create some of the biggest and best games in the industry. Not just once a year. Sometimes it does work out that way due to development cycles, but Sony said it themselves, hopefully twice a year, right? 2 major, massive games a year. Microsoft is promising 4. Although I don't think Microsoft is promising that all 4 of those games will be that large, right? It's not like every game that's coming out for Microsoft after Starfield is going to be on the same level as Starfield, And that's totally reasonable. Why would anybody, I don't know how anybody could expect that. We have Hellbound 1981. Thank you so much, man. Hellbound, you got to let me know, what soundbite do you want, man? We have Hellbound following up Exley 3000, gifting another 5 memberships. W's in the chat for Hellbound. Love to see it, man. Both Exley and Hellbound and others have continued to show just tremendous support during these streams. Hellbound says he would like an Arnold. I'll give you 2 Arnolds. Give you Crazy Arnold and Crazy Arnold laugh. There you go, Hellbound. Thank you so much, man. I really do appreciate that support. Capono, you're saying, MBG, you've got good people here. Absolutely, man. We have a really great community of people. Some very nice, very kind, very supportive people, very generous people. Love to see it, man. And Jay Pierce, thank you for the $10 super chat. You're saying, so Sony just announced that they were doing cloud gaming where you can stream the games you already own. That is going to be one step over Xbox where you stream through a subscription. Is it a win for Sony? It's difficult for me to answer that question simply because I guess I was under the impression that it worked the same way for Microsoft. I was under the impression that if you bought a game from the Microsoft Store that is compatible with cloud, then you can stream that game. Am I wrong? I know that you can stream games that are in Game Pass, but I don't know for sure that you can stream specific games that you purchase from the Microsoft Store. Like, my assumption is you can. My assumption is that you can. But because I don't have firsthand experience with it, and I honestly haven't researched it that much, I can't say for certain, Jay. So I see some of you guys saying no, not true. So are you trying to tell me that the only way Xbox players can stream games is through Game Pass. So basically, if you're using xCloud, you can only access games that are in Game Pass and not games you purchase outside of Game Pass, if I'm understanding this correctly. This might be something I have to look into a little bit deeper. Gaming Survivor is saying streaming only works through Game Pass, not store games. Interesting. Well, that does create an interesting separation right there, doesn't it? Because that's news to me, man. I didn't know that. I don't think that's like a horrible thing, because it like makes sense, right? That Microsoft would start with Game Pass. And maybe that is kind of like a separating factor. And also it really does kind of make sense that Sony would pursue that route with cloud streaming, where it's like, we want to try to make it so a lot of the games, or at least some of the games you buy digitally and own digitally, can be streamed, because that's what Sony's asking people to do. And it's another separating factor here, where on one side, Sony is just going down the route where this is what makes the most sense for us to do, because, we're asking people to buy, like, we expect people to buy their games. But again, I can only speak so much. I could be completely wrong with what I'm saying, Jay, and I want to make that known. I do have to look deeper into this. I am very uneducated on xCloud and how Microsoft's cloud streaming works. And right now I'm just witnessing Sony just begin to actually like get a little bit more serious with it by announcing like PS5 game streaming. But if I had to choose, I think both would be ideal, right? I think this is what both Sony and Microsoft should try to strive for. They should both try to make it so that every game, or almost every game that is in their catalog on PlayStation Plus and Game Pass, ultimately can be streamed for those who are subscribed to that, right? But they should also strive to get as many, especially the more popular premium titles that people are going to buy. They should try to work hard to make those games streamable as well for those who want it. Like, personally, I don't see myself really ever streaming games. I mean, there might be like a use case for it at certain moments in my life, but generally, if I had to choose between not playing a game or just being able to stream it, there's a decent chance I might just say, I'm just going to hold off and I'll wait until I'm home or in front of my screen with my console. You know what I mean? But I do understand that streaming is going to become more and more important to both Sony and Microsoft going forward. It's just the way it's going to be. It's not something that I'm necessarily going to support heavily, because there's no reason for me to. But that's the thing. If both Sony and Microsoft want to start reaching new people, and they want to start growing more horizontally, not just vertically, then that you couple that with the fact that cloud technology is improving year after year, it makes sense that this is a very logical route to go. And I will be interested, actually. I think when these games, I don't know what the lineup of games is going to be for PS5 cloud streaming. They did just say that they just announced it, and they said that they're going to have more information on the actual launch and the lineup soon. I would actually like to try it, just to try it, right? Just to see how it's going along. How good or bad is streaming a PS5 game going to be? So I would at least give it a try at some point. But it also makes me think that Sony must be working on some type of portable cloud device. We know the Q Lite is coming at the end of this year, and the Q Lite is just a remote play device. So it's tethered to your PlayStation 5 console. So no matter where you go, it's going to use your PlayStation 5 console as the server, basically, as the host. Whereas if they make a dedicated cloud streaming handheld, you wouldn't need a PlayStation 5. And that could be part of Sony's long-term plan here, where right now the PlayStation console is at the center of everything Sony does, but it wouldn't totally surprise me if in the next like 3 to 5 years we start to see them kind of, do things where it's like the console's still the the priority, but we're starting to find ways now to get people involved in the PlayStation ecosystem that are not just about you don't just need the console. Sony isn't quite there yet. Like, the reality is Sony might not choose to do that until they start to see console sales slow down. That's a possibility as well. I think that a lot of people are under the assumption, and again, this kind of feeds into the main topic of discussion today. I think people are under the impression or the assumption that it really depends on what Microsoft does. And I really don't know that it does, because it's like, what if Starfield, and this is just a hypothetical scenario, but let's think about this. What if Starfield basically makes Game Pass explode? Right? It just absolutely makes Game Pass skyrocket in numbers. And suddenly Microsoft is out here like every month basically saying like, we've gained, this many million more subscribers. And then they have games like Hellblade and Avowed come out, and then it bumps it even further. And before we know it, we see a scenario where Game Pass is sitting at maybe 50 million subscribers, right? Over the next like year and a half. I think that's way too aggressive. I don't know that Starfield could do all that for Microsoft, but again, it's a hypothetical. Let's just say it shocks everybody. It's a surprise hit for Game Pass. Naturally, I think people are going to, again, assume that, well, Sony must be worried about that, right? But what if at the same time, Sony's out here reporting that they're still breaking records with PS5 sales? You know what I mean? Like, would Sony actually feel anything at that point? Hey, Spider-Man 2 sold 15 million to 18 million copies, and we're breaking records with how many consoles we're selling. I don't think so, man. I don't think Sony would necessarily feel, but, that to me is an ideal scenario. You're saying those two things won't coexist. But how do we know that, though? I would argue they might just be able to. Because you know what I think Microsoft is doing right now? And it's obviously, it's about giving people a good value and a good deal. And when you have Sony coming out here basically saying like, hey, we're sticking to what we do. We're still selling our games at a premium price, right? And they're saying this at a time when Microsoft is offering this value with Game Pass. I think it's obvious that Microsoft really is playing the long game. Like, they're really not just looking at the next 8 to 10 years. They're not. They're looking well beyond that, because if Microsoft continues to, again, like, buy studios at the rate that they are and flood the Game Pass with the type of content that they're getting ready to flood it with, and the Game Pass number just keeps rising and rising and rising, I almost get the sense, and this may sound a little bit cynical, but it's really not. Like, I actually think that, again, we're talking long-term future, like 20, 25, 30 years down the line from now. I think Microsoft is essentially betting on the video game console becoming, I don't want to say completely obsolete, but basically becoming obsolete enough that that's not how the overwhelming majority of people are consuming their games. Like, basically that the overwhelming majority of people are consuming their games through something like the cloud, through their TVs, through their screens that are coming from that are in their pocket, right? Who knows? Maybe even through headsets you can buy that project it. You know what I mean? Like, I really think that this is the future that Microsoft is envisioning, and you can't blame them because it kind of does seem like that might be where it's headed. But this is why I think one thing Sony hasn't ever really discussed, and it's kind of interesting to think about this, Sony has never really discussed their long-term vision. And they haven't really done anything to make it super obvious what their like long-term vision is. The only thing Sony has really ever done is show their short to midterm vision, and even midterm is stretching it, right? And that is so fascinating to me because this is why I think people are ultimately so caught off guard by a lot of the decisions that PlayStation has made in the past like 3 to 4 years. And a lot of people have said that a lot of the decisions that Sony has made were basically reactionary. They were reactionary decisions based off of what Microsoft is doing because Microsoft is being very disruptive. And that I think that is actually kind of proving to be true. And I guess where I'm going with this conversation is that essentially what I'm trying to say is that until Sony sees that interest in the console is waning and dropping to a significant degree, that's when I think you'll see Sony really start to make some shifts and some changes that some people would have told you they would never do ever, right? But that's just it. When do we think that could happen? It's clearly not going to happen with the PlayStation 5. The PlayStation 5 is set to be seemingly one of the most successful consoles ever. What about the PlayStation 6? Is the PlayStation 6 going to be that successful? Or is it going to be the first console we see where, we're kind of back to the PS3 numbers now? And then what about beyond the PlayStation 6? What does that look like? Sony doesn't have the answer to these questions. We don't either, nor does Microsoft. But the one thing we do know is that Microsoft, at the very least, can afford to wait, So even though we're talking about a future maybe 20, 25 years from now, it's just interesting to think that Microsoft may be sitting back thinking, of course we want to get there as soon as we can, but we can wait. It's interesting. It's very interesting. Jay Pierce, thank you for the second $10 super chat, man. You're saying, I watched Spawn Wave on YouTube. He has videos every day. He has information about this. So basically, Sony is going to be ahead of Xbox on this, but Xbox will have it soon. I didn't know this either. Interesting. Yeah, Spawn Wave. I see some of his videos sometimes as well, and I'll have to go check that out because I had no idea. That's actually really funny to me. Isn't that kind of funny, though? Isn't that kind of funny to think that, like, it turns out Sony is making a move that's going to put them ahead in the cloud space. And it's also incredibly ironic because if you, again, look at the Activision Blizzard deal, why is the CMA blocking it? The CMA is blocking it because they're afraid that Microsoft is going to try to monopolize, essentially, an industry that hasn't even been fully created yet because they're going to be the first ones to create it and make the rules. And then here we are with, apparently, if what you're saying is true, Jay, Sony coming out with a cloud feature for PlayStation that Xbox doesn't actually even have quite yet, but they're planning on it. I have no doubt. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't see why Microsoft wouldn't do that. Just spilled water on myself. Great. Saul Goodman, you're saying you seem to underestimate Sony a lot. No, actually, nothing. I don't think anything I'm saying is underestimating Sony. It's just that a lot of times when you get into these conversations and, there are a lot of like fanboy conversations, a lot of rhetoric that's just thrown around. To me, this notion of like Sony's number one and Sony's the best and they're always going to be number one and they're always going to be the best. I think that this is possibly the most naive like viewpoint you could have of Sony. because that's just not true. Sony is not going to be number one forever. At some point in time, something is going to happen. It could be their own, it could be by their own making, like a huge mistake that Sony makes themselves. It could be something Microsoft does. It could be something that a company that we're not even thinking about right now does at some point down the line. I just think that when you are at the top and when you are the king of the hill, it becomes exponentially more difficult year after year after year to remain on top. And there's always somebody gunning for you. And that's kind of what's funny about this, because I'm using that analogy, like PlayStation is the king of the hill. Microsoft isn't climbing that hill anymore. You know? Microsoft isn't climbing that hill anymore. Instead, they're just building their own hill. And the idea is that hill is going to be much taller than the hill Sony's standing on top of right now. And so if Sony looks up at that hill eventually, assuming Microsoft succeeds, Sony looks up at that hill and they see, well, they're a lot higher up than us. They have two choices. Either build that hill that you're standing on higher to match them, or start climbing the hill that they built. And that's what makes this entire conversation about the difference in business models so interesting, is that it's the implications it has. The implication it has on the future of not just the gaming industry, but just in general, right? Like how are people going to interact with PlayStation games 10 years from now? Because I think if you were to ask somebody right now, how are people going to interact with Microsoft games 10 years from now? Everybody feels like, oh, I know exactly how. Through Game Pass. Through the cloud. I feel like if you were to ask somebody right now, how are people going to interact with PlayStation games 10 years from now? I think the answer to that question is there's a really good chance that 10 years from now, Sony might still just be doing exactly what they're doing. They have a PlayStation 6 out there, and they're releasing their big exclusives on that console at a premium price, and then later down the line, they put it on their subscription service. But I think one major differentiating factor is this. I think Sony's going to put PlayStation Plus on other devices. I think that's obvious, right? Like, I think when you listen to Sony talk about their business model and how we're not putting our games Day&Date onto PlayStation Plus, they don't necessarily say anything. Granted, maybe nobody was asking, but they don't say anything about never putting PlayStation Plus anywhere else. And I think the idea is just simply that they will, in a way, follow Microsoft, but not entirely. Because I did say earlier in the stream that both Sony and Microsoft, they're on separate paths. They have two different business models, and that is still 100% true, and that will likely remain true for the foreseeable future. But I did also say that they're ultimately trying to achieve the same thing. And I think that right there is what's ultimately going to bring these two paths that seem to be going like this, and it's going to start to make them slowly start to go a little bit like this, right? Or at the very least, if one's going here, if this is Sony, if this is Microsoft, right? Sony might start coming a little bit more this way, a little bit more, closing that gap a little bit. And I think that will come in the form of Sony potentially one day getting ready to put PlayStation Plus on more devices and allowing people to access that catalog of games. Because if they do that, that is going to be, in a way, direct competition to Xbox Game Pass, but Sony's still going to hold on to the thing that's going to sell their console, the thing that's going to sell their hardware. And so I guess when we try to come to some conclusive, I don't know, just some kind of conclusive statement here regarding this conversation, regarding what Sony says not doing Day&Date is working, and that's our plan that we're sticking with going forward. It forces you to, ask why. And then we answered that, right? Money, numbers, success. Sony's having it all right now. Of course they're not going to stop. Of course it's working for them. But then it forces you, well, it doesn't force you. You can if you want. And I'm going to ask the question. Okay, well, what does this all hinge on exactly? What does this all hinge on exactly? Well, I think it's obvious. It hinges on the console. It does. It absolutely hinges on the console. We're not going to see Sony do any type of major shift with their first-party exclusive games, maybe except for live service games. I'm talking single-player games. They're big hitters. We're not going to see any type of major shift unless something of significance happens within the console space. That's my assessment. I'm not saying that's a guarantee, because the truth is, as you know, I'm not Sony. I'm not Jim Ryan. I don't have an actual, roadmap in front of me. They do. They know their long-term vision. If I had to try to sit here and guess what is Sony's long-term vision, you know what I think Sony's long-term vision is? I think Sony's long-term vision is as simple as we will try our best as the company that is number one, as the company that has been number one in gaming for some time now. We are going to try our best to keep this model that we're very good at, that works for us, and that has allowed us to become number one. We're going to try our best to keep this the most relevant model in video games. And if the day comes where it's not, then we will do whatever we have to be number one, even if that means it has to be under a different model. And I think if anybody is able to read between the lines, I think if people are able to read between the lines with these companies, it just simply it always comes down to the same thing. It's that they'll say one thing today, and then they might say another thing entirely tomorrow if something changes. It's all business, man. It's all numbers at the end of the day, and it's no different for PlayStation. It's no different for Microsoft. So I don't have a problem with what Sony's saying here. I fully expect it. I fully anticipate that for the remainder of the PlayStation 5 generation, this is exactly what they're going to do. They're not going to do Day&Date. They're going to continue to sell their games at a premium price, maybe even some of their live service games. But when it comes to the PlayStation 6 generation, I do think that we're going to continue to see Sony incorporate this model. But depending on how that generation goes, especially because, frankly, we have no idea what Microsoft may or may not do come next generation, especially if they have Activision Blizzard, right? I think if we're going to see any major changes in Sony's path forward and the way that they handle their first-party games, single-player games, and the way that they distribute them, I think that change could occur sometime during the PlayStation 6 generation, but not this generation. And and to me, that's how I feel about it, and I'm totally cool with that. I don't mind it. James, you're saying, if I'm not mistaken, didn't Sony say that they will continue to produce their single-player games along with live service? I'm pretty sure that was specific. Absolutely, yes. as I said, James, we have to be careful when we listen to any of these corporate executives speak, because we always have to keep in mind that it's not that they're lying, it's that the nature of business and the nature of the gaming industry is that things are always changing, things are always in flux. And so something that they said a year ago might change a year later. And the reason it might change is because, well, it turns out that it has to. A good example of this is, I believe you're referencing the interview from last year with Sony's head of first party, Herman Hulst. And in that interview, he basically was letting people know that, we are going to pursue live service games, and this is something that we're seriously investing in. And he was also sure to let everybody know, like, we're going to continue to make big single player games. We know that's what the PlayStation fan base wants, and we're going to always continue to deliver that. But in that same interview, if I'm not mistaken, he also talked about how they're going to bring their games to PC, right? And he said in that interview that, man, what is going on? Is my stream lagging out? He did say in that interview that look, we're gonna give our games at least 1 year minimum before we put them on PC. He said 1 year. And everybody was kind of surprised because they were like, oh, well, Herman, last year you said you were going to give your games about 2 years. So clearly in that time frame, Sony made the decision that we're going to go from 2 years to 1 year. And then this year, the next year, Jim Ryan comes out, who's above Herman Hulst, and he says 2 to 3 years. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how you have to be very careful about how much you buy into what these executives say? Because even as we are reading this statement from a Sony executive, and he's saying, we're not doing Day&Date because it's working, I think there will be some people who I think walk away, be like, yeah, that's right. Sony will never do Day&Date. Sony isn't Microsoft. Sony will never copy Microsoft. Sony does their own thing. It's because they make the biggest and best games. And they kind of have that attitude. And it's like, I get it, but you really shouldn't, you should not assume that won't change. Because it's literally been proven by Sony themselves that you can't fully trust what they say. The only thing you can fully trust are the numbers. And I know that sounds bad to some fans because they're like, are you calling Sony a liar? No, I'm calling them a business. That's what I'm calling them. So my suggestion to any PlayStation fans who care about this type of stuff and you care about whether or not Sony's going to change their business model anytime soon, just pay attention to the numbers, right? Check out the quarterly reports. See what Sony is reporting. See what they're saying. See how their games are selling. See how their console's selling. And that's all you need to go with, And I always said, and I do want to add this, I always said that Sony is going to experiment with putting their games on PC, and they're going to keep pushing. I remember saying this a couple years ago. I said they're going to keep pushing, and they're going to close that gap, and they're going to see how far they can push. And I feel like Sony feels like they may have pushed too far. I only say this because it is pretty interesting and potentially telling that Sony went from, it's going to be every 2 years. At 2 years after a game launches, we're going to put it on PC. Then a year later, actually, it's going to be 1 year. And then after they said that, they come back out a year later and say, actually, 2 to 3 years. So now even up to 3 years. It tells me that at some point recently, they looked over all their numbers and they came to the conclusion that it would be more beneficial if we like extend that gap even further. Certainly not 1 year. We're going to do 2 to 3. That's what I'm saying. Like, they came to that conclusion based off of the numbers, not what the fan. Like, it's funny because Jim Ryan said, like, fans seem to be okay with that. Like, dude, you think I love how in that Japanese interview, Jim Ryan's like, I talk to the fans all the time. Like, really? Who are you talking? Like, where are these fans that you're talking to? I don't like, unless he means through the numbers. I'm communicating to the fans through the numbers. They communicate to me what they want and what they don't want. And it's just so funny to me that, you know, obviously Sony's like Jim Ryan in an interview, he's not going to say, yeah, I looked at the charts and we crunched the numbers and we decided it would actually be better if we just push it 2 to 3 years, not a year. He's not going to, I mean, he could say that, and I actually wouldn't mind because I'd be like, that's pretty candid. You know, you're a businessman and you're talking business numbers here. But that's the reality. Sony crunches the numbers and they make their decisions based on the numbers. That's just how it has it's always been that way, but the difference between Sony under Jim Ryan versus Sony under maybe like the previous leadership like Sean Layden and Shuhei Yoshida, Jim Ryan doesn't really care that much, seemingly, to try to sugarcoat things for the fan base. And anytime he tries to, he gets grilled for it because it just seems not true. You know what I mean? It's like when Jim Ryan talks about like playing the latest game. Like, I think we all are aware that Jim isn't really a gamer. He's not like going home after working his day at Sony and hopping on, you know, Spider-Man 2. I mean, he could be. That'd be quite surprising. But we all just are in agreement that he's more of a businessman. He's more of a numbers guy. And I think that everything we have seen from Sony this generation so far, the one thing that I do feel very confident stating and extracting from it is simply that Sony follows the money, but they do it to such a degree where they will actually make every decision at any given moment based on what the money's telling them that day or that quarter. Maybe not that day, but that quarter. So it's interesting stuff, man. It does make you wonder, like, what the next generation of leadership will look like for PlayStation and how much it might differ from this leadership. I don't know. I guess maybe would it be Herman Hulst? Would Herman Hulst end up taking Jim Ryan's position in the long run? Wonder what that would look like. And James, again, you're saying, I totally understand what you're saying, but you're in a doom and gloom mode right now for no reason at all. PlayStation isn't going to lose the crown over Starfield. No, see, that's the thing, though, man. You're right. You are right. PlayStation isn't going to... Microsoft bowed out, dude. You know? Sony has held the crown for a long time, right? And Microsoft tried to take it, and they failed over and over again. And so Microsoft ultimately decided, we're not going to go for your crown. We're going to make our own. And that's why you say I'm in doom and gloom mode. I don't think I'm in doom and gloom mode, man, because honestly, like, what I'm visualizing at this point is maybe we're going to see a scenario where both Sony and Microsoft are just truly succeeding in their own way, and everybody's happy. And they're both making money, they're both doing good numbers, and they're both putting out good games, and they're both finding success. You know, I don't think Starfield's going to take Sony's crown, and the reason being is because is Starfield going to stop people from buying PS5s? No. Is Starfield going to stop people from buying Spider-Man 2? No. If anything, it's just Starfield is doing exactly what Microsoft knew it would do, which is it's making people who are either already buying PS5s and buying PS5 games or were planning on buying them also now consider, I might throw Game Pass into the mix now too. I might throw an Xbox into the mix now too. And I just think that Microsoft believes that that's what it's going to be for now. But in the long run, that number, like, theoretically, this is not doom and gloom. This is just logic, right? Theoretically speaking, Game Pass should be able to easily eclipse PlayStation 5 sales. Because think about it. Game Pass is only $10 and it's on a lot of devices. A PS5 console is a PS5 console. You need to pay $500 for it. And it's physical hardware. So, theoretically, it should eventually become easy at some point in time. I don't know when that time is going to be. It might not ever happen. It might not ever happen. Well, yeah, I know PC is hardware. I know that. But I'm saying, like, you know, well, I know. Yeah, Game Pass is basically available on hardware. But I'm saying it's just the hardware it's available on is much more accessible and much more readily there. Like, it's already in people's hands, like their phones, their TVs. This is what, you know, and a lot of people do have PC. And if they don't have a PC that's strong enough to actually run these games natively, that's where Microsoft's like, you can just do it through the cloud. I'm just pointing out that that Microsoft is giving they're putting it out there for people. They're bringing it to the people. They're not asking the people to come to it. They're putting it out there, and they're saying, all you got to do is subscribe for $10. Sony is saying, you come to us and you pay $500 for our console. And when you compare those two things, $10, $500, you can begin to see, logically speaking, why in theory it should be easy for Game Pass to, you know, eclipse PS5 sales eventually, or the next PlayStation console and its sales. But it's not quite there yet. And Jay Pierce, thank you so much, man. We have Jay Pierce coming in, gifting yet another membership today. Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate that. You've been doing some work here too for the community. Guys, let's get some W's in the chat for Jay. He's been showing some good support today, so I really appreciate that. Jay, let me know, what soundbite do you want, man? Do you want a Jim Ryan soundbite? I got a Mark Cerny soundbite. I got a Jim Ryan soundbite. I have a Metal Gear soundbite somewhere. I forget which number it is though. You let me know, Jay. But yeah, I'm not trying to come off as doom and gloom. I don't think it's doom and gloom. I just think I just think it's the reality of the situation, man. The reality of the situation is that when Phil Spencer comes out and says that, you know, we're not trying to out-console Sony. We're not trying to be the green version of what Blue is doing. What he's really saying is it does sound like he doesn't want to compete, but it's not that Microsoft isn't going to compete. It's just that they're not playing by Sony's rules. That's really what he's saying. And we can see that. Saying let the game, there we go.
Enough from me.
Meanwhile, Jim Ryan.
We don't have the games do our talking.
Enough for me. We'll let the games do the talking. Make sure I stay hydrated, right? From my perspective, PlayStation can only lose the crown, so to speak, like the metaphorical crown, right? Well, it can only happen in one way, in my opinion. And it's if they start screwing their games up and simultaneously saying, we don't really care about our PlayStation hardware anymore, or at least it's not the priority. In my opinion, that is where PlayStation would lose the crown, because when I think about, for me as a PlayStation fan, what is it that attracts me to the PlayStation brand, that brings me over as a customer and basically turns me into an enthusiast? It's just those two things right there. I grew up playing on a console, and I've always preferred the console experience. It's what I'm most comfortable with. I like the convenience factor. To me, I feel like there's something kind of unique and special about the console. And I know that to some people that sounds silly because it's like, who cares? Just, PC is so much better and versatile. And I get that. I respect that. But for me, that's how I feel about console, right? And so when Sony is coming out here in 2023 and being like, we have a PlayStation 5 and it's for the price, it's a really powerful console. Like what you're getting and what it can do for games, well worth the asking price. And we're going to support that console. And the way we're going to support that console is we're going to put out really, really, really good games. Hopefully, what are really, really good, high quality games. And when I think about the games that I played on my PlayStation 5 since launch, specifically from Sony, it's been stellar. It has. It's been phenomenal. And I understand that maybe not everybody feels that exact same way. Maybe there's some games that people have played that they feel weren't as good as they thought they would be or whatever. And it's like, I read a comment yesterday from somebody, and it, like, obviously there are some trolls that come onto my channel. And I know that when I see a comment that's upvoted that's maybe a little bit negative towards PlayStation, there's no doubt that at least some of those upvotes, possibly all of them, it's hard to say, are from trolls. But I have to also assume that at least some people who are agreeing with this person's comment, at least some of those people are actually being genuine and assuming that commenter themselves is also being genuine. And the thing that kind of struck me about that comment is the person said how I should just bring it up. I don't want to this comment I don't feel comfortable paraphrasing because I'm likely to screw it up. Let me find it real quick. I guess it must have got, I feel like it must have got pretty downvoted because now I can't find it. What, did the person delete it? Sorry, I really wanted to read this comment to you guys because I thought it was... Now I can't find it. All right, well, I guess I'm going to have no... Maybe it was on a different stream. Maybe I'm getting my streams confused. All right, well, you know what? I'm going to have no choice but to paraphrase it because I seemingly can't find it. So I hope I don't butcher it. But basically what the person said is that they were excited for Spider-Man 2, but now suddenly they just feel like they're not really excited for it. And the main reason is because they are concerned that Spider-Man 2 is not going to be worth $70. They're afraid that it's going to be too short. The game isn't going to be long enough, and it's not going to have enough content to justify the $70. And that comment got quite a few upvotes, I assume, from, people who are, again, like, I don't know, maybe there are more people than I realize that actually feel that way. And that's why I'm trying not to be too cynical and not just assume that people are trolling, but maybe there are more people that feel that way. But that's where it's like, I could not disagree with that comment more. And here's why. It simply comes down to, I can respect that a person feels that way, and that's their opinion. But all I think to myself is, when I look at the games that Sony has delivered, not just for the PlayStation 5 generation so far, but throughout the PlayStation 4 generation, there is literally zero indication that Spider-Man 2 will not be worth my money. For me. And I feel like if I were to like debate that person or try to create an argument, not an argument, but a reason why this person might want to see things a little bit differently, it's exactly that. I would have to ask that person, well, have you played any of Sony's other games? Like, did you play Miles Morales? Did you play Spider-Man 2018? Now, if this person said, I bought and paid for Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2018 and Ratchet and Clank, and I wasn't satisfied with them. I felt like they were overpriced and I paid too much for them. And if they were actually serious about that, I would say, well, then you know what, man? Your reasoning makes complete sense then. I can't how could I argue against that? You know what I mean? Like that if you bought the games or you played the games and you just ultimately felt like they weren't worth the asking price, I could understand why you would feel that same way leading into Spider-Man 2. But that's where we are at odds ultimately, because it's like, I'm sorry to hear that, man, but I feel literally the opposite. I thought when I played Spider-Man 2018 and when I played Miles Morales and even Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, I thought all of these games were well worth the money. I didn't play any of these games, and by the time I finished them and completed them and then, you know, did the extra content and got the platinum trophies, I did not at all feel like, I think these games are overpriced. I didn't feel that way at all. And frankly, I haven't felt that way about, I'm really trying to think right now if there's any game that I paid full price for from Sony where by the time I was finished with it, I felt like it wasn't worth the asking price. I'm thinking. I'm just running through all these games in my head right now. No. No. I'm being serious when I say I cannot think of a single game that I've purchased from PlayStation that by the time I completed it, I thought, you know, this wasn't worth the asking price. You know what? All right, there is one, and this is maybe some people might see this as nitpicky, but The Last of Us Part 1, I feel like because it was like, there's a caveat for The Last of Us Part 1. The caveat with The Last of Us Part 1 is if you never played The Last of Us in your life and The Last of Us Part 1 is your first time buying and playing The Last of Us, it is absolutely worth $70, in my opinion. However, I do feel that if you played The Last of Us on PS3 or you played The Last of Us Remastered and you paid full price for it and then you paid another $70, you know, for Part 1 on the PS5, I do feel like it's a, you know, the asking price is high, you know, like like Sony asked for $60 with the PS4 and then they asked for $70. I did feel that The Last of Us Part 1, to me, it felt like it would have been better off at a $50 price point. However, I can't sit here and pretend that I didn't thoroughly enjoy the game. I did. I put a good amount of time into it. I enjoyed the game all over again. I got the platinum. But I do feel that that is probably the only game right now. I see people mentioning Returnal. Returnal for me was a game that felt well worth the asking price. And the reason is simple. I was actually nervous with that game. Like, I was like, I don't know, man. That $70, I hope this game has enough here. And when I bought Returnal, it took me like 30 hours to actually beat it because I struggled with it. But then after that, it actually, the thing about Returnal that genuinely surprised me is it wasn't like a long game. It wasn't a massive game. It just wasn't. But it had insane replay value. And I ended up putting, I think, close to 100 hours into Returnal, as insane as that sounds, trying to do every single thing in the game. Although I will admit that the last like 20 to 25 hours were, I would say I put about 70 to 75 hours of solid gameplay into Returnal. And then the last, 25 to 30 hours were me trying to collect those freaking glyphs because they were RNG, and that was a nightmare. But still, getting like 70 hours worth of solid gameplay from Returnal, yes, that's well worth $70, and I do not regret that at all, So I also just want to say that there's one aspect to this that I didn't talk about yet, but before I do, DS, you're saying Skyrim sold 60 million plus copies. At least that's what Todd Howard is saying. My thoughts is that's massive. And that's, again, this is why when I said multiple times, Starfield is going to do some of the heaviest lifting for the Xbox brand that we've ever seen. Yes, it is. I don't know that Starfield's necessarily going to go on to sell 60 million units, but if there's one thing that I do feel very confident in saying is that Starfield is going to be a game that sells, well, it does make it kind of tough because Game Pass, we have to factor that in. I think Starfield, no matter what, is going to sell very well, but I think between game sales and Game Pass subscribers, Starfield could, yeah, I don't know that it'll get to 60 million, but I think it's going to do, I could see Starfield in its first year easily doing 20 million plus, not like just sales, but, you know, Microsoft talks about players. I think in the first year, they're going to announce like 20 to 25 million players have played Starfield. And then I think it's just going to keep climbing like year after year after that by a good like 3 to 5 million players. Maybe not 3 to 5 million. That seems a bit much, but maybe like a couple million each year. And then there will be some years that if they like continue to support the game, it might get a bump. But the thing about Skyrim though is like, isn't Skyrim kind of a meme because it's been sold, like it's been like resold, like I don't even know how many times, but basically people meme on it because they just keep releasing this game to be purchased, and people just keep buying it for like every single device and every generation, everything. But hey, man, that's an effective tactic. Sony does the same thing. I mean, don't get me that to me, that's the greatest irony in all. Yeah, exactly. People still buy it. That's the greatest irony. It is and that right there is all we need to look at. I can have my opinion, you can have your opinion, but the only thing we should really ask, but what is the market saying? The market's saying they're perfectly fine with it. The market's saying, yeah, we'll buy it again. So if you're Bethesda, we could say no. Save your money? No, thank you. No, you'd be like, okay, here. You know, it's just the way it works, man. But yeah, good for them. Good for them, Skyrim. Crazy to think it's still as popular as it is. Perfect Image, you're saying, as a Sony fan, no Day&Date. First, you're saying for games, first come, first serve. I think a lot of PlayStation fans are okay. Well, again, let's talk about the numbers. Right? Let's put our personal opinions aside. What do the numbers? The numbers tell us that a lot of PlayStation players are totally okay paying full price for games, you know? So, yeah. James, you're saying, how about Final Fantasy 16? No coverage. I actually talked extensively about Final Fantasy 16 in my stream yesterday, James. I don't know if maybe you missed, it was at the beginning of my stream. We talked about it for, I think, the first half hour or so. And even the stream before that, I talked about it as well. So if you're looking for some Final Fantasy 16, Devil Shooter has timestamps up on those streams. I'd recommend going back a day or two, yesterday's stream and the day before, and clicking the tabs for Final Fantasy. But yeah, can't wait for Final Fantasy, man. I'm just counting down the days at this point. Did I finish the second part of the demo? Wrestling Mark, I did. And as I said, you must have missed it yesterday. The first like 30 minutes of yesterday's stream, I talked all about my thoughts on the entirety of the demo after completing it. So again, if you're interested, please go check that out. But yeah, generally speaking, man, it just seems to me there was something else I meant to say here. Oh, okay. Yeah. So there is another aspect to this topic that I didn't really talk much about yet. We've alluded to it and talked about it a little bit. Oh, you're asking about the combat demo? No, I actually didn't play that quite yet. I got to boot it back up. I almost deleted the demo because I was like, I gotta put it to the side because I'm just like, I want to continue the story. I want to continue the game. I feel like they left that, dude. They left the demo on a serious cliffhanger. I appreciate that because I'm like, damn, that is a smart move to get people to buy your game. But now I'm just sitting here, I'm like, come on. 22nd can't come here soon enough. But yeah, I think I'm going to have to go back and try it out because a lot of people are saying it's really fun. So I have to go check it out. But the other aspect to this topic in particular that I haven't talked about yet, even though it's mentioned in the article, I feel like not enough people talk about this because, again, I feel like these conversations have a tendency, at least on the internet, depending on where you look, these conversations have a tendency to go in one extreme direction or the other. And, not enough people are focused on the actual really important aspects. And they're just like completely either ignoring them or downplaying them. And what I think is something here that should not be underestimated, because somebody did mention earlier, they said, MBG, it seems like maybe you're underestimating Sony too much. Well, actually, one thing I know about Sony that I don't underestimate is even though they make their mistakes at times and they're not perfect, but they are very, very strategic. And that's not to say that other video game businesses are not strategic, but Sony, I mean, in some instances, seems to really put, I don't know, they put this big emphasis on like finding this perfect balance, I think I think that's the best way I could describe it, is Sony seems to try their hardest to find an appropriate balance. And I guess that's really the hardest part. Like if you were running Sony, right? The hardest part is we want to balance being able to continue to make profit, to continue to make the most amount of money and to continue to grow, but also we have to continue to stay in the good graces of not just our fan base, but gamers in general. And that is the hardest line to walk because, you can't get too greedy, but you also can't be a charity, basically. And I think, that's pretty rational. If you're a business, if you're running a business, I want to highlight the fact that Sony is still putting these games into their service. And that to me is the thing that is just constantly overlooked. One of the things that Sony came out and revealed, I actually want to bring this up because this is some very interesting data. Again, when we're talking about looking at the data, let me see. So check this out. I have an article here. Stray had the highest player count for PlayStation Plus Extra's first year. Ghost of Tsushima gets the most hours played. Not a lot of games launch on PlayStation Plus Extra. However, it seems like one of those day one games made quite a splash, according to Sony. Stray brought in the highest number of players for PlayStation Plus Extra in the first 12 months. This is fascinating to me and something that is worth paying attention to because Stray is not a first-party game and Stray is not a massive game. But Stray had enough buzz around it, and I think Sony became well aware of the fact that we struck a deal with a good game here. It is an indie game, and it seems that Sony may want to pursue this kind of situation where if they want to try to get more people into their subscription service, striking deals with these like more popular indie games might be a good middle ground between, okay, it's not our first party heavy hitting titles, and they're not AAA, but they're kind of right in between, right? Like they're these bigger indie games that are launching exclusively for our platform, even if it's timed. That's interesting to me. But it continues here and it says, Nick McGuire, the vice president and global head of subscriptions at Sony, told GamesIndustry.biz that Blue 12 Studios' dystopian cat game was quite successful in its first year and brought in the highest number of players. And it continues by saying, Stray was the first and only one of 3 day one launches for Extra. And we received relatively well. It has been received relatively well and has been hyped since its notable reveal at the PS5 reveal stream in June of 2020. Its popularity was also born out in the data from the wrap-up stats from 2022, as Stray beat out big games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Ghost of Tsushima, even broke a record for concurrent players for publisher Annapurna Interactive on Steam. So really interesting there. I mean, to me, it's fascinating to think that Sony has only struck a deal with 3 day one launches for PS Plus Extra. That I didn't realize the number was that low, actually. That's kind of surprising to me. I thought that number would have been higher, but only 3. I have to imagine going forward, they're probably going to try to pump that number up a little bit. Games from PlayStation Studios also did fairly well during PlayStation Plus Extra's first year. McGuire explained how Ghost of Tsushima topped the charts for most hours played, something that was undoubtedly aided by its lengthy runtime. The game's Icky Island DLC and Director's Cut Edition was also on the service, giving those who had already played the game more reasons to jump back in. Other games like Horizon Forbidden West and Spider-Man Miles Morales also had impressive stats. He says Ghost of Tsushima brought in the highest number of hours of gameplay. People have really stuck around and really invested in that game. I love to hear it, man. Dude, as you can tell, Ghost of Tsushima is one of my favorite games ever, so I love to hear that. That goes to the strength of PlayStation Studios titles, which have seen great engagement and lots of excitement. 4 of the top 10 over the year have been PlayStation Studio titles, whether that's Spider-Man Miles Morales, Horizon Forbidden West, and even Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which only joined recently. It's climbing very quickly and growing month on month. These exclusive titles are really what's resonating. It's bringing people in. So this, to me, is something that is going to go under the radar, but is very important to highlight. And I don't think some people won't quite understand what Sony is communicating here. They're communicating, we are growing our subscription service by leveraging this type of strategy. And this type of strategy is working. And that strategy is not just like, hey, we're releasing games at a premium price and they're not going day and date, but the fact that we are going to take these games once they're basically done selling and they're really not selling much anymore. That's when we put them into the service, and it's working, man. I mean, to me, it's awesome to hear that so many people apparently got completely lost in Ghost of Tsushima. I can't blame them, man. Imagine that. Imagine you passed on Ghost of Tsushima and you come across this, you're saying, wait, why does the casual need to know this? The casual does not need to know this. The only thing the casual gamer needs to know, because it is absolutely relevant to them, is simply this. If you want Sony's games day one, you're going to have to pay full price for them. But if you are willing to wait and just be totally patient and you're not in any rush and you're subscribed to PlayStation Plus, you might just gain access to that game. That is relevant to the casual gamer. But the reason why I think this is certainly relevant to the more enthusiast type gamer, the person who's paying close attention to PlayStation and, gets engaged in these conversations. It's because, just as many people have said to me over the years, MBG, how do you know? And who are you to say that Game Pass can't succeed and can't work? Who are you to say that Game Pass won't work for Microsoft, that they can't find big success doing it this way? And it makes me realize, you know what? I don't know that. You're right. Who am I to say that? I have no idea. I can't tell the future. No one can. I feel like the exact same thing can be said here now for Sony with the way they're handling it, where who's to say that Sony can't find tremendous success doing this? Basically Sony isn't telling their PlayStation Plus subscriber base, you're not going to get our first party games. So don't even think about it. It's not happening. They're just telling them you'll get some of them, some big ones too, as long as you're patient. Obviously, the number one thing Sony's trying to tell everybody, including their PS Plus subscribers, is please buy our new exclusive at full price. But they know not everybody's going to. And so I just think that this is a very balanced way that Sony's doing it. And most importantly, this makes sense for Sony. That's what I want to reiterate. And I know, again, there are going to be some of those people for some reason that want to yell at me and say, Sony's anti-consumer, and all you want to do is support this anti-consumer company. And honestly, I can't engage in conversation with people like that, because it's like, if you're not willing to see both sides of the coin and have some type of understanding from a business perspective, then I don't know what to tell you. If you just want to have like a yelling match about what's most pro-consumer and what's not, well, I hate to break it to you, you're very likely going to lose over and over again in the long run, because companies are not here to be your friend. They're here to make money. And while a company they can do pro-consumer things, and they should get praised for that, you always just need to understand that they're not doing it just for that reason. You know what I mean? They're doing it because there is a plan in place to extract more money from more people. And that's fine. Like, that's not a bad thing. Sometimes it can become a bad thing if it gets pushed too far, right? It can be pushed too far, and greed can take over. That absolutely happens time and time again. And that's why I'm not sitting here saying, yes, Sony, please take more and more of my money. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to communicate a clear message to Sony that, you know what, Sony, you want to make more money from me and your customers. You want more money. That's fine. But what are you offering me? Like, what are you trying to sell me? And there just has to be an appropriate balance, I would say, between the video game company that's trying to sell you on something and the consumer. There just has to be a balance here. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I really don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. And frankly, I think anybody who tries to tell you otherwise, frankly, is being completely disingenuous, because I promise you that people who make it sound like you're wrong for paying $70 for a game that you're excited for, there aren't many of those people, but they are out there. Anybody who tries to say that, I promise you that in another area of their life, they are paying a premium price for something that somebody out there could probably turn to them and say, you're wasting your money, dude. That ain't worth it. But who am I to say? Who are they to say? You know? Like, people are going to do what they want with their money, and I realize that, and it's up to you. It's up to me. You know? We all have to just make our decisions. And so, to basically conclude this topic, because this pretty much was the main topic of discussion today, just to recap, yeah, Sony says that not doing Day&Date is continuing to work well for them, and Sony deciding to put their games into their PS Plus subscription service later down the line when they're pretty much done selling has also been working out well for them. And it seems that Sony is out here expressing a bit of confidence in this balance and this strategy, and they're making it clear that this is what we're going to continue to do as long as it remains this way. And so next up, we have Spider-Man 2. We'll see how that sells. We know how that's going to sell. What about Wolverine? Guys, I have a question for you real quick. How is Wolverine going to sell? Because here's the thing. I'm more excited for Wolverine than I am Spider-Man, but generally speaking, Spider-Man is much more popular than Wolverine is. So I have to imagine Wolverine isn't going to sell as well as Spider-Man. But it's still probably going to sell pretty well, right? I think Wolverine's still going to sell really well. If Spider-Man, you're saying at least 10 million? Yeah, I could see that. I could see Wolverine being a 10 million seller, especially if it gets like really, really good review scores. ACM coming in with a $5 super chat to say Fast X or Fast 10. I don't know which way you want to say it, was incredible with 3 exclamation points. I'll be honest with you, man. I've never seen a Fast and Furious movie, and frankly, I don't plan to ever see one. Not to say that there's anything wrong with your super chat, man. I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy to hear that you saw Fast X and it was incredible. But, dude, I came across a Twitter thread a couple weeks back where people were asking to share the most ridiculous clips of some of the most ridiculous things that have happened in the Fast and Furious franchise. And I got lost in that thread, dude. And I was just dying laughing at just so many of these clips, dude, where I was like, what is this movie, man? What is this series? I mean, and I see people making fun of Vin Diesel because like there's this whole thing where Vin Diesel thinks he's actually Dom, like he's literally actually Dom in real life, and he dresses like him and he acts like him, and it's like, oh, it's pretty funny, man. But I appreciate that super chat, ACM. And we have the Gaming Nation, has been a member for a month, saying, I don't mind waiting for games to come to the service. However, it was greasy when they took Spider-Man off the service to boost sales for 2 before, or to boost sales before 2 comes out. Yeah, and that to me was kind of, yeah, I can agree with that. That was a bit like, come on, Sony. Now, see, this is where Sony, I think, it's so tough for me because it's like, I get it, man. Like, logically speaking, I can totally understand where it's like, yo, we're about to launch Spider-Man Remastered separately for the first time. And we know people are going to be hyped for Spider-Man 2. So this is a great opportunity to basically boost the sales numbers of Spider-Man 2018. And for all we know, Sony might be very close to hitting a new number, like a new high or something for Spider-Man, and this is how they're going to get to that number. But yeah, something like that, it's kind of tough though, isn't it? It's kind of tough. Like it is, you're right, it is a little bit greasy, but at the same time, you can't take away the fact that it was just sitting there for months and months. You know what I mean? So I'm not justifying Sony taking it out. I'm just saying that it's one of these tough situations where it does, I will say this to the Gaming Nation, or Nating, sorry. I think that this is a strategic move on Sony's part. You know why? Because I think what Sony wants to do is not let anybody get too comfortable. I think that unfortunately this is a byproduct of the fact that Sony does still sell they still get good game sales. I think Sony doesn't want people to get too comfortable and assume that if we put a first party game into PlayStation Plus Extra, it's just there for, forever. I think that this is Sony's way of just like making it clear that, hey, get it while it's hot. You know what I mean? Like if you were somebody who was waiting for a specific game to drop into PlayStation Plus Extra, you better get on that sooner rather than later. But I do agree that it's not a great look, and it's a little bit, it's a little bit questionable. It's like, really, Sony? Like, come on. You really need those last sales from Spider-Man Remastered. You can't just kind of leave it there. Because, I don't know, man. What's strange to me about it is that Sony wins either way. So that's why I feel like Sony removing Spider-Man may have been more of a, we don't want people to get too comfortable strategy, rather than we're trying to boost sales of Spider-Man 2018. Because, dude, people who want to buy and own Spider-Man 2018 remastered are going to do that. They're going to do that. You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like if they kept it on PlayStation Plus, there would have been some people who would have decided, I'm just going to play it through PlayStation Plus, but Sony still wins because you just got another PS Plus subscriber, and that person may stay subscribed for the next year or two, and you'll make way more money off of that subscriber than you would on that single purchase for Spider-Man Remastered. So, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know why Sony would do that, knowing that you basically win either way. That's why I'm leaning more towards, I think that was Sony's way of trying to send a message, and that message is, we will also take games out of here. So don't hesitate. Subscribe now. That's my guess anyway. Could be totally wrong with that. 18 May, you're saying, MBG, the fans demand to know where you got the unbranded hat. Are you trying to tell us something by not subscribing to hats with brands on them? That's interesting, man. That's funny that you mentioned that, because I've been wearing this hat for a long time. Actually, I don't know that I'm trying to send a message, But there's definitely a reason for it. And it's funny you bring this up, and I never really talked about this. First off, I'll have to get back to you tomorrow and let you know what the brand is. I bought it from Amazon, and I literally just searched like black flex fit hat. And I just like bought the first one. I think it was like 12 or 15 bucks. And the reason being is actually because I didn't want any brands on my hat. I just wanted a plain black hat. That's what I wanted. And I don't know why. I don't know why it is. Like I actually just got tired of wearing brands on my head. No matter what it is, or wearing logos on my head. You know what I mean? It just literally got to where it's like, I just want a plain black hat. So that's it. That's as far as it goes, man. I don't know that I'm necessarily trying to send a message. If I had, you know what I think it might be too? I think it's that if you look behind me, if you look at my setup, I have so many different branded stuff everywhere. I feel like everywhere you look, everything's got a logo on it. Everything's got a brand. Sometimes I feel like I just appreciate a good old, just something plain. There's no text on it. There's no logo. There's no imagery. It's just something plain and colored. Could be colored, could be black, could be anything, you know? Maybe I'll start buying different color hats, you know? And I'll start interchanging. I have an orange hat, blue hat, purple hat, yellow hat. It seems unnecessary. But thank you for asking, 18 May. If they want a brand, they need to sponsor MBG. Yeah, if anybody wants to sponsor me out there, I'll put your logo on my hat. There you go. Michael Lynch, you're saying the person that said that they were scared that Spider-Man 2 wouldn't be worth $70 is a sheep and is letting others online sway his opinion. Never has Insomniac given anybody a reason to doubt their skill. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, Michael. Like, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to call him a sheep, but I do agree that it is kind of telling, isn't it, Michael? It is kind of telling that I never read a comment like that on my channel before the Xbox show or before before all of this discourse started happening. I never read a comment like that. At least, I don't want to say that nobody ever made a comment like that. I'm sure somebody did leave a comment like that, but I didn't come across it because it definitely wasn't one of the most upvoted. And this time, yeah, it is. And this is kind of what you see. You have to be incredibly aware and mindful of internet culture. You have to. Because internet culture is not real life. And you have to also always remember that when you are reading things that people are typing online, whether it's on YouTube in a comment, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on Reddit, or anywhere else, Facebook, it doesn't matter. Well, Facebook's a little bit different, but generally speaking, these places where people are talking about games, and Facebook could also count. The point is, if you're reading what somebody's saying on the internet, just keep in mind that like people can say anything and there's zero consequence. They can lie, they can make stuff up, they can tell the truth, and no one would know any different. So when you see people say, like, because Michael, what you're basically implying is that this individual maybe got caught up in like threads on Twitter or Reddit of people basically, trash talking Spider-Man or something like that, which we have seen that happen. The truth is, like, do you know how many of these people who are saying these things are still going to go out and buy Spider-Man 2? They are probably typing up these things and saying these things and involving themselves in these conversations. Meanwhile, when they hop off the internet, they're booting up, a game on their PS5. They're playing a new game through PlayStation Plus. Not saying it's all of them, but I'm saying that is a thing. And it occurs probably way more than anybody realizes. And you have to just be very mindful of not just strangers on the internet, right? But even like figureheads, people who, even people like I'm not saying I'm a figurehead, but even like a channel like mine, where it's like, I'm here to talk to you and give you my opinions. I'm just one person, man. Like, I will always encourage people, do you. Don't listen to me. Like, if I say, dude, I think everybody should, I just played Final Fantasy 16. That demo was incredible. I think literally everybody should buy it. If you're somebody who's like, well, I don't think I'll like Final Fantasy, and I just know that I wouldn't like that game. But, you know, MBG is telling me I should buy it. Dude, go with your gut, man. Go with your intuition. Go with what you know is right for you. People need to do that, man. Like, and people will do that. That's why I say, if you want to know what people are doing, look at the data, because the numbers don't lie. But you know what does lie? Comments on the internet. And that's just the way it goes, man. That's the way it goes. Comments on the internet, you never know. Hard data, the numbers don't lie. So, but I'm trying not to be rude to anybody also as well. You know, if somebody says like, hey, I don't think Spider-Man looks good, it's like, okay, I disagree. I think it looks incredible and I'm super excited for it. And I know this might sound rude, but I don't think it is. I think it's just truthful. I think it wouldn't be a rude thing for me to say that I don't think Sony's going to... I think Sony and Spider-Man 2 and Insomniac are going to be perfectly fine if you decide not to buy it. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's going to be perfectly fine. Sometimes I think that's just another byproduct of the internet. Again, if there's one thing I'm absolutely guilty of, and I've learned over the years, is sometimes the internet can convince you that what you are saying on an individual level, you know, is what a lot of other people are in agreement with, and what a lot of other, you know, things have a tendency to become echo chambers, and that is never a good thing, because it's like, for example, it's like if somebody were to say right now, you know what, Spider-Man 2 is going to be 10 times better than Starfield. Period. And let's say I were to say that. Now, hopefully nobody clips this, because if they do, they're clipping it out of context and they're a liar, because I'm saying that this is not how I feel. I'm just trying to make an example. If I were to say Spider-Man 2 is going to be 10 times better than Starfield, Spider-Man 2 objectively looks significantly better than Starfield, and Starfield doesn't hold a candle to Spider-Man 2, there might be a small group of people that agree with me and cheer me on and say, yes, you're absolutely right. Yes, yes. And I will see that those people are saying, oh, look at that. That small group of people over there, they like they're agreeing with what I just said. Yeah. Yeah. And then before you know it, it's like, there's just this little tiny circle there where we're saying, you know, I'm saying something that's kind of nonsensical, and there are some saying IGN already clipped it. And then there are people, you know, a few small vocal minority people that are agreeing with it. You know what I mean? And then it's like, turns out that it, like 95% of people don't feel that way. Either, like, they don't feel like Starfield is any less than Spider-Man, and they don't feel like Spider-Man is any more than Starfield. They just think they're both good-looking games, and they're excited to play them. You know what I mean? And we have Mitul Patel coming in, gifting 5 memberships. Shout out to you, Mr. Patel. Thank you so much for that, man. Let's get some W's in the chat. We have somebody new here, seemingly gifting memberships. Really appreciate that support, man. That brings us up to 17 members on the day, getting ever closer to our goal of 25. So thank you so much, man. I'll give you a crazy Arnold for that one. Keeping it going today. Oh, I accidentally bumped it up to 18. Not a big deal. But there we go, man. Love to see it. Say love my content. Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Good stuff, man. Good stuff. But yeah, what I'm basically just saying right now is that I think it's fun and engaging and interesting to have different types of conversations. You know, like, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with talking about, like, man, Sony has a big game coming out in October, big AAA game, Spider-Man 2, and Microsoft has a big game now too coming out in September with Starfield, and they're both, you know, there's a lot of hype for both games. Like, let's, like, who, you know, there's nothing wrong with some healthy competition and kind of talking about, like, what, you know, which game's going to get more attention, which game's going to steal the spotlight, are they both going to be evenly matched, you know? I'm not against that at all. I think that stuff is very fun, and I think it's interesting, and I think it does also, I think it is beneficial because that is kind of what we want, right? Like, Xbox players want it, PlayStation players want it, everybody wants it, everybody in the gaming industry wants it. We want healthy competition. And I'll never be against that. So, you know, it's like, again, people have mentioned to me all this past week, like, what, you don't want Microsoft to compete? You don't? Absolutely not. I do want Microsoft to compete, and it's nice to see that they're fine. That, like, we are at a point now where it's like, you know, I don't know that Microsoft has just suddenly, you know, usurped Sony, and it's Sony's just tumbling downhill. No, I don't think it's anything like that. But I do think that this is by far, like, the most. I'm trying to think of the way to word this. So, I've been following both Sony and Microsoft for years now. And after that Xbox showcase and after the PlayStation showcase, this is like the most positive I've ever seen. Not just Xbox fans. That's the important part here. Not just Xbox fans. This is like the most positive I've seen people about Microsoft and the Xbox brand in years. And I'm not saying that just immediately results in all these people are, again, internet comments, reality, we have to wait for the data. But here's my expectation, and I actually probably should have mentioned this in a previous stream, but I think this is a good time to mention it. Talking about numbers, talking about data. I'm very interested to see what Xbox's numbers look like in the next couple of months, because Starfield is coming very soon. It's coming in September. And I'm not as interested in... I am interested in seeing Sony's numbers as well and their data. And the thing I'm actually going to be looking for is to see if Sony's numbers drop at all. You know, because if this is really going to allow Microsoft to compete in the way that everybody's thinking it is, where it's like now Sony actually has some competition, then we should see Microsoft's numbers get a really good bump and a really good boost. Not just console sales, but Game Pass numbers, revenue, all those markers, you know, engagement. That should all get a significant bump, and especially from September and onwards, things should really begin to shift. And I'm going to be kind of like stacking that up against, well, what's happening to Sony's numbers? Are Sony's numbers staying the same? Are they rising? Are they dropping? It's going to be very telling. It's going to be very, very telling. And I, you know, if Microsoft's numbers start rising, then yes, that is going to equate to more market share for Microsoft. And that right there is the epitome of competition in any market. So, Kirby Shaw, you're saying Gran Turismo movie is going to be released digitally for $70. No way. Nuh-uh. Sony did it, man. They crossed the line. Sony did it this time. They did it this time. Could you imagine if Sony actually did that? That would be... Wow. No one would buy it. I know he's trolling. Relax. Just to make just so everybody's aware, Sony's not doing that. But it's just so funny, right? Like, it's so funny to imagine, like, imagine Sony being that insane, where they're just like, you know what? Hey, we sell our games for $70. Let's sell our game movies for $70. It'd be like, what? Dude, you know, somebody would buy it. Somebody would champion that. Really quick, guys, I do want to let you know, I know this is very random, but I just happened to come across it really quickly here on Twitter. Rockstar Games co-founder Dan Houser has announced Absurd Ventures. Per release, Absurd is building narrative worlds, creating characters, and writing stories for a diverse variety of genres without regard to medium, to be produced for live action and animation, video games, and other interactive content, books, graphic novels, and scripted podcasts. So, for those who aren't aware, Dan Houser, he is one of the founders of Rockstar Games, one of the, a person who's responsible for the Grand Theft Auto games in a very big way. So, people were always kind of wondering like what he was going to do next after leaving Rockstar Games. And so there you go. He went to go kind of do his own thing. PlayStation Pete, you're saying Mortal Kombat 1 uses Unreal Engine 3 modified, same as Mortal Kombat 11, Street Fighter 6. Uses the RE engine used in RE7, but Tekken 8 uses Unreal Engine 5. Hold on. Is that true, PlayStation Pete? Guys, can we get some can we get some verification on this in the chat? Mortal Kombat 1 is using a modified version of Unreal Engine 3? That doesn't. You're saying it's Unreal Engine 4. Okay. Maybe PlayStation Pete, I think maybe you meant to type Unreal Engine 4 but accidentally hit 3. I was going to say Unreal Engine 3, that sounds impossible. Like when I look at like who uses Unreal Engine 3, right? Nobody uses Unreal Engine 3. Unless, I don't know, PlayStation Pete, did you meet? Because that would be shocking. There's no way. I got to check now. I got to look this up. Just smashed my mic. Let me see. What engine is Mortal Kombat 1 on? I don't think we actually have explicit confirmation of this. I think people are trying to figure out. Wait, Mortal Kombat 1 runs on Unreal Engine 4. Okay. There we go. We did get confirmation. Speaking during the latest episode of the Jeff Gerstmann Show, Mortal Kombat 1 director Ed Boon stated that the game runs on Unreal Engine 4. Okay. Yeah, I was going to say Unreal Engine 3 would be insanity. That would be insane. So that's not too bad. The game looks really good for being Unreal Engine 4, but yeah, Tekken 8, man. I mean, Street Fighter 6 looks good. Tekken 8, though, I'm going to be interested to see how Tekken 8 turns out because Unreal Engine 5, man, we're starting to see more Unreal Engine 5 games. It's been a long time coming. It has been. Those are the two. So, wait, is there a release date for Tekken yet? Tekken 8 release date. No specific release date yet, but it's still slated for this year. So, assuming Tekken 8 does come out this year, oh man, I don't know, man. That's tough. That's tough. I want to play Mortal Kombat 1, but I love Tekken as well. And there's so many other games in between that I want to play. It's too much, man. It's all too much. No Street Fighter? Not quite yet. No. With Final Fantasy 16 coming up, there's no chance I play Street Fighter. Can't wait for a new Matrix game. Yeah, I mean, we got that Matrix Awakens demo in 2021. That thing was impressive, but I don't know that we'll ever get another Matrix game. Maybe at some point in the future. I think the Matrix as a franchise is pretty much done. They tried to make that last Matrix movie, and that did not work out very well at all. I actually kind of erased that from my memory until just now. But yeah, I guess the question I want to ask you guys, and I want to ask the chat, how, because I've been talking about this topic for, almost 2.5 hours, and I want to leave it to you guys now. How do you feel about this? Like, how do you feel about Sony saying that they're sticking with not doing Day&Date because it's working for them, and they're going to continue to release their first-party games into PlayStation Plus later down the line when they're done selling? What are your opinions on this? What are your feelings on it? And Disco Cobra, thank you for the super chat, man. I'm going to read that in just a moment. I got to make sure I pay attention to the chat momentarily here since I just asked a question. I'm going to end up asking a question and just walking away. You're saying you don't trust them. They're doing whatever works now. Saying good, no issues as usual. Somebody says fine. Somebody says it's normal. Showcasing games too early can make consumers desperate. Leo saying I'm happy with that. Gavin saying perfectly fine. Crucifixion saying it's fine to him. Hellbound says he has no issues with it. Mario says I'm playing Witcher 3 currently. Sad League says it gives devs leeway. Mostly everybody seems to be saying they're fine with it. So I guess at this point, what I want to do is invite kind of the opposite. I want to invite everybody when this stream is done, and hopefully if you're listening afterwards and if you weren't here live, even if you are here live, please come back and join in the comment section. I want to hear from people on both sides. Like, I want to hear from people who are okay with it, why you're okay with it, some of the reasoning. And then for people who might not be, because I'm sure there are some people who don't like this and are against what Sony's saying. I would like to know the reasoning why, and I'm just curious to get a wide range of different opinions here on this one. And so Disco Cobra 2013, man, thank you so much for that super chat, buddy. You're saying, so what games are you playing currently, if any? I have a plethora of retro and new games in my catalog, just not gaming on the same level as I did when I was younger. I just play when I feel like playing. Well, first off, Disco Cobra, I think that's perfectly fine and actually completely understandable. I think a lot of people gaming these days kind of compare their gaming routine, I guess, to what it used to be when they were younger. Obviously, as you get older, you have more responsibilities. There are more things you got to do in life that when you're younger, you just didn't have to worry about doing. And because of that, you naturally have less time. Things have to be a little bit more organized, less chaotic, right? We're actually more chaotic, but less. Because I know the feeling you're describing, man. Like, I remember when I was younger, I would just kind of play games, and it was just a lot easier to get lost in games. And I think maybe even to a detriment, like when I was younger, even though it was fun and it created some of the best memories, like, dude, there were times where it's like, I probably put I'm sitting there for 8-9 hours, at a time. Maybe that's a bit extreme. Like, I would take small breaks to eat and whatnot. But there were definitely times where it became a little bit unhealthy, where it's like, dude, and it's not like that for me anymore. And so what am I playing now? Well, I started Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Unfortunately, and this is not because I haven't been enjoying the game, but I was afraid this was going to happen. That game's probably going to end up on the back burner. Because once the Lies of P demo dropped, I dived into that, and the Lies of P demo was actually a lot longer than I expected it to be. I thought the Lies of P demo was going to be a half hour or something. 3 hours in there. I'm like, how is this demo not over, dude? I was genuinely surprised at how long it was. And then as soon as I finished that, the Final Fantasy 16 demo dropped. And so I did complete that. Apparently, I got to go back, though, and play the other game mode that's available on it. A lot of people are telling me, it's worth it. Space Gambler, you're asking, do I like the Lies of P demo? Absolutely. From the moment I started controlling the character in Lies of P, I could tell, I'm like, yup, everything about this game, the aesthetic, the whole, I like everything they're doing with it, man. And it just, I knew immediately, I could tell when watching gameplay of this game a while ago with the trailers and stuff and the little gameplay sections they put out. I was like, this game's for me. And then once I actually played the demo within the first 5 minutes, I'm like, this game is 100% for me. So Lies of P, hopefully, I don't know what I'm going to be playing at the time it releases, but whatever I'm playing might have to take a back seat because Lies of P is a day one buy for me. No doubt about that. I see you saying it was clunky. I didn't. So yeah, with Lies of P, it is a little bit clunky. It is a little bit. Like if you compare it to Bloodborne, it's not exactly the same. And I did see some people saying that the reason why it felt clunky was because there's actually a little bit of input lag. That would make sense to me, but at the same time, it doesn't feel bad. The gameplay of Lies of P doesn't feel bad. So while it may feel a little bit slower and at times a little bit clunkier, generally speaking, I felt like I could get adjusted to it pretty easily, and it felt satisfying. And that's all that matters to me. But yeah, I played that. I played the Final Fantasy 16 demo, and so now we're about, I think, 7 days away from Final Fantasy 16 launching, and I did download from PS Plus. I downloaded Trek to Yomi, and I really wanted to try to play Trek to Yomi before Final Fantasy 16 drops, because a lot of people were telling me like, hey man, this is a pretty good game. Like, it's pretty fun, worth giving it a try. And I'm a huge fan of Ghost of Tsushima, and when I look at Trek to Yomi, I'm like, this game kind of reminds me of Ghost of Tsushima. I've always liked that kind of samurai type, aesthetic, and I really like that. So I don't know, man. Like I think I can tell right now that Star Wars Jedi Survivor is going to end up probably taking a back seat, because now I'm going to be playing probably Trek to Yomi and trying to complete that before. And I don't know how long Trek to Yomi is. Like, I don't know if it's like a 4-hour game or something, or if it's like a 7-hour game. I have no idea. I'm just assuming that it's big enough to keep me busy between now and then. Saying where are you at in Jedi? I think I'm on like chapter 3 or something. I'm not like super far into it. And I don't know, man. Like, I don't want to say that I don't like Jedi Survivor. It's just, I don't know, man. Like, something just kind of happened while I was playing it, where like the last time I put it down, for some reason, I just like didn't feel the desire to pick it back up. But then again, I don't know that it's anything against the game. It really might just be that it's the reason why I didn't think about picking it back up was because like I'm busy playing other things now. Keep in mind, in the middle of me trying to play Star Wars Jedi Survivor, I was also streaming these events and watching these events, and obviously I'm still doing daily streams. So I think generally speaking, it basically just got kind of, caught up in everything that's been going on and all the different demos that have been releasing. So yeah, we'll see though. But you know what? I did kind of go on this little rant about Star Wars yesterday and how I feel like I'm just getting kind of like, I don't dislike Star Wars. All right. I grew up with a lot of things Star Wars related, and I never was like a super fan of Star Wars. I've always enjoyed it, but I do notice like now I just find myself like, let me put it to you this way. Like, when, how for a lot of people it's like Star Wars, like it has the Star Wars branding, therefore I'm already attracted to it. I'm like the opposite. Like, it, in the sense that I'm completely indifferent. Like, I do not care that it says it's Star Wars. You know what I mean? Like, that's why that Star Wars Outlaws game is so fascinating to me, because I'm like, dude, this doesn't look like Star Wars Outlaws as a game itself doesn't really look like many other games out there. It looks like it's trying to do some different things, like it's like people are saying it's like Space GTA a little bit. Like, yeah, I get that, like a much more PG version of that. But the fact that it has, like, I'm just saying that game is not selling me because it says it's Star Wars. That is the last thing that it's selling me on. And the same can be said for Jedi Survivor. But yeah, I think Trek to Yomi is what I'm going to start playing next. And of course, I still play a little bit of Dead by Daylight, maybe like not every single day, but that's kind of like my go-to multiplayer game with friends. And me and my wife play it a lot. We just do 2 or 3 rounds sometimes. Dead by Daylight, I'm pretty much over at this point. I feel like I've played it to death, you know. And that's why I'm like, Sony, come on, man, drop Helldivers 2, drop one of your live service games. I'm done with this live service game, Dead by Daylight. Although they do have Nick Cage coming, so might have to stick around for that. Oh, speaking of which, by the way, apparently Nicolas Cage paid a visit to Kojima Productions. Seems like the chances of Nick Cage being featured in Death Stranding 2 just went up quite a bit. Quite a bit. Anyway, guys, that is going to do it for this stream today. About 2.5 hours. I don't want to just go on and on for the sake of going on and on. I want to thank everybody for your support today. Thank you for listening to what I have to say. Thank you for showing up. I want to give a big shout out to everybody who gifted memberships. We hit 17 members today, which is awesome to see. Thank you guys so much. Shout out to everybody who is a channel member, and also a big shout out to everybody who donated a super chat. You guys keep this channel going. You keep it funded. You allow me to continue to do this, and for that, I am seriously grateful. So thank you so much, and a huge shout out to Devil Shooter for doing the timestamps for the streams. That is very much appreciated as well. I'm going to go take care of some stuff I got to take care of. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. The last thing I'm going to ask you is to just hit that like button on your way out. It helps with the streams and it helps with the algorithm. But yeah, that does it, guys. I will hopefully see you tomorrow with another stream, and I have another video coming out later today. So check that out. But until next time, guys, take care.